What it is, what it is. Let me get this figured out. Chat, welcome into the people that are in the chat already. Y'all are something. 27 and rising. Welcome into the Inside Carolina Day After podcast. I'm your host, Tommy Ashley. We're sponsored by Johnny T-Shirt, johnnytshirt.com. All right. Y'all have come to know this podcast as a place where we all gather. Some days to have fun, some days to not have fun. Again, I'm Tommy. We're Johnny T-Shirt and johnnytshirt.com. Jason Staples at the bottom, and Mr. Buck Sanders live and in person in Charlotte still. Buck, I'll go ahead and get it out of the way. We could just play Taylor's take on loop and go get some morning coffee. Taylor Vipolis bringing the heat on his take now posted on the message boards. But what'd you think? Not about the take, about the game.
That take was almost as spicy as Taylor's in my conversation earlier this week. So,
Oof.
Let me just start by saying I thought it was a great atmosphere in Charlotte yesterday. I think the North Carolina fans responded very well. Good representation from Tar Heel faithful, and they were there ready to see North Carolina, compete and take this game, at least to the wire. And that didn't happen. I said before the game that North Carolina could not come out on the wrong end of the turnover margin, and they did in a big way. They gave up 15 points on turnovers. Just everything that could go wrong after about the first 5 minutes did go wrong. So it's a day for crying in your beer if you're a Tar Heel fan. Things just went sideways quickly after that first quarter and never got back on track. There's a lot to talk about, actually, but my heart goes out to all the Tar Heel fans that were there in Charlotte, showing up to support their team and to have a performance like that.
Yeah, I mean, the way you started, let me expound on it a little bit. We, of course, did the Inside Carolina tailgate show over there at 1200 South Graham. And what an atmosphere, man. I mean, people want to bang on North Carolina fans. One thing you can't bang on is the Inside Carolina portion of the North Carolina fans, which is what made earlier this week a little interesting to me at some press conferences. But Inside Carolina and Carolina fans in general showed up to support that team. The Bowls lot, the parking lot over there was wide open. Ryan Switzer joined us. I mean, he looked like Jesus walking around with everybody following him around out there, like the Pied Piper, to get some time with him. So what a great, like you said, atmosphere in Charlotte. And then the game started, and the game started well for North Carolina. DJU started for Clemson, Jason, and looked terrible right out the gate. And North Carolina did some things early. Jason, overall thoughts, because we got a lot to dig into and dissect. I feel like we're going to biology class this morning. We're going to dissect this one. Jason, what you got to start with?
Well, I mean, it looked like North Carolina came in really well prepared for the first couple drives of the game.
Yep.
And that was it. Yeah.
And it appears, I mean, look, I mean, they were well prepared to handle the way DJ had been playing. And I mean, what can you say? They switched quarterbacks, and I mean, how can you be prepared for two quarterbacks, or for somebody to actually make throws and things like that? I mean, once there's another guy that comes in, I mean, that's going to kind of screw up all your preparation, and that's that. So, I mean, what can you do? They switch quarterbacks, and that's what can you do?
It was a little bit.
I'm not sure. Are they allowed to do that?
It was a little bit more well known than what they've played against the last 2 weeks. So,
yeah, I mean, but I mean,
where was he ranked last year in high school?
Well, it depends on if you look at the overall or just dual threat. Dual threat, number 1. Overall, number 2. And those are pretty accurate rankings. But I mean, let's be honest. They made a quarterback switch right away, and I mean, like I said, I'm not sure. We got to check the rule book to see whether or not that's okay. But they just that kind of submarined all of Carolina's plans, and there you go. I mean,
yeah, they win this game if DJU plays the entire game.
Yeah. I mean, if he plays the entire game and plays like the first couple drives, then they win this game and they win it comfortably. And that you got to give the coaching staff a lot of credit for being prepared for the one quarterback who wasn't throwing it well. But like I said, it's really hard to be prepared for that second guy when they're going to put him in and all that. So
let's sort of, Buck, since we're here, let's talk about this. Max said in postgame they didn't prepare for Klubnik. And now I know some of that is coach speak. And said Gray, the interview I got to listen to this morning, and admit quite bleary-eyed doing it. He said they did, and they had some stuff, but I mean,
not enough.
Dabo Swinney said all week, and this is, people can bang on Dabo all they want, and he comes across as old shucks and all that, but he is ruthless. He talked about they're going to play DJU. They're going to play DJU. That's our guy. They did it against South Carolina. It cost them the game. Playing him and sticking with him probably cost them the playoff without question all season. No way in the world was he going to cost himself an ACC championship by sticking with that guy. But that comment from the head man in itself is brutal. Combined with what we've seen with all the other stuff with the backup quarterbacks and all that, where are we here assessing this North Carolina coaching performance right out the gate? Because Taylor Vipla's pulled no punches. Buck, well, I want your take, and then we'll get into the game itself.
Two things that I would point out related to Clemson's offense. One is yards after catch.
I was going there. You beat me there.
Through the air, Klubnik threw the ball 81 yards. They had 236 yards after catch. You're not going to beat too many teams that way. He wasn't bombing downfield. And his completion percentage shows it. You don't hit 20 out of 24 over 80% if you're trying to drop the ball in a bucket 40 yards downfield. That doesn't happen. He was throwing it for the most part short and intermediate, and North Carolina just could not get anybody on the ground after the catch. They just got torched by Clemson's runners or receivers after the catch. Point number two would be 0 sacks, 0 quarterback hurries. How much pressure do you think Klubnik felt when nobody got close enough to him to have a quarterback hurry? Not sacked, and they had, this is not directly related to the pass attack, but they only had 2 tackles for loss. Meanwhile, Clemson's defense had 4 sacks, 8 quarterback hurries, and 7 tackles for loss. Clemson was getting pressure on North Carolina, and North Carolina was getting no pressure on their offense.
Yeah, Pro Football Focus has Klubnik pressured on 8 snaps.
The official stats have got 0.
Yeah, which
that's 0 quarterback hurries, but 8 is a very low number.
8 is a very low number. That's a little higher than Clemson had given up most of the year, but that partly was because of him holding the football, and it didn't seem to matter. And their standard for pressure is basically just anything that impacts like the quarterback's process. So I mean that's barely that's not much. That's a low standard. And he, by the way, was 83% completion percentage there.
Yeah. 0 sacks, 0 quarterback hurries. So I don't know. Tommy might could have thrown for 250 and 3.
Back in my day, I could have, without question.
Yeah, but back in your day, you could throw that football over them mountains.
But that leads me to the point. The trenches, Carolina whipped across the lines, both lines.
Absolutely. So we could talk about Cade Klubnik all we want to, but if you don't get pressure on the quarterback at all, and you can't tackle anybody after they catch the ball, anybody is going to look good. Anybody is going to look good. I'm sure they have a 4th-string quarterback. They could have put him in. They did there. They put the 3rd stringer in there near the end.
Who, by the way, was the former number 1 ranked quarterback in the country when he came out, 6 years ago.
And he went 5 for 5, right?
Yep.
I mean, in order to limit a quarterback, you've got to have some form of defense. You've got you got to be able to get somebody on the ground, and you got to get some pressure on the guy. So, congratulations for winning the the ACC title as a quarterback for Cade Klubnik. But gosh almighty, North Carolina could not have made it any easier on him than they did.
Yeah, Jason, let's go there. And I don't know. I feel like I'm beating somebody's dead horse to do it. I mean, they've asked about the media, the press, the fans have all asked about pressure. What did Carolina do in this game any differently than they've done all game? That's why I like to come to you, because in my eyes, especially from the stands, great seats, by the way. I love that view we had, and shout out to the section that was pretty rowdy. Too many Clemson fans, but no, let me tell a story. I always have a story. My favorite part of the night is having a Miami football fan sitting behind me being apologetic because Clemson was working North Carolina. And he'd never seen Miami play in person other than one time, and that was because he buys tickets to the ACC Championship game every year. And that's the only time he'd seen his, quote, favorite team play in person. I digress. Jason, Gene Chizik's defense, what'd they do tonight or Saturday night that they didn't do, or maybe they have done all year, other than not get pressure and not get hurries and not get sacks?
Well, I don't think they did a whole lot that's really any different. I mean, the fact is, once you get to this stage of the year defensively, you kind of are what you are. I mean, you can't install a bunch of new stuff, week 12, week 13 in a season. You're not doing a lot of that. They had a couple pressure packages, in there, but to me, it looked like a normal game plan from them. Nothing really extra that they brought in. They probably came in with 4 or 5 significant blitz packages, and then ran a lot of cover 7, rotated to some other stuff at different points, some man and 2-man and a little bit of 2. They ran some basic stuff. They ran some rip Liz at different points as well, which is a middle of the field close where you got a single safety. They ran some of that to try to get some pressure a few times where you bring that other safety down a little bit. They varied their coverages, they varied their looks, tried to bring some pressure, but ultimately you have to do it. And in terms of schematically, I mean, the scheme on defense is not the problem, right? I mean, what I heard Buck saying is, and correct me if I'm wrong, Buck, but it seemed to be that you were indicating that, basics like, I don't know, tackling, physicality, things like that, actually have impact on whether a team wins a game.
Absolutely. If I could jump in here for a second. Clemson did not run the ball well.
No.
Against North Carolina. North Carolina did a fairly decent job stopping the run. What I don't know what the adjusted yardage
3.2
was,
yards
but
per carry.
yeah, that for all we heard about Will Shipley and how he was going to torch the defense on the ground, that didn't happen. But the point of that is that they didn't need to run the ball because all they had to do was throw it, 2 yards, and you got a 20-yard gain. I didn't do the math on it, but they had 28 completions and 230 some yards after catch. What is that, 8 or 9 yards after the catch on every single throw on average?
Mm-hmm.
So why bother running the ball in that scenario? I will say that I thought Jacoby Cohen looked good. He only had 1 tackle, but when they used him, when he was in the game, I thought he stood out to me.
There's some promise there.
There's some promise there. So we'll see. But yeah, defensively, you got to do something. If Clemson could just throw the ball, for get 8 yards after catch on 28 catch. North Carolina only had 1 less completion than they did. They had 27 completions. North Carolina did, but they only had something like 113 yards or so after catch. So mathematically, there's your ball game right there. But back to our regularly scheduled Jason Staples explanation here.
I mean, I think that's basically where I was going is, I will say, I mean, they made a transition, game 4, game 5, where they decided that they were going to emphasize trying to stop the run and at least stop one thing.
Yes.
Mac has talked about this, and you could see that some of the stuff that they're doing, that they did sort of second half of the season was very much, if we go too high and we play, standard Gene Chizik defense, we're just going to get shelled in the secondary and we're going to give up, 200 rushing yards a game. So we're just going to stop the run and force teams to beat us in the air and, at least do one thing, make them beat us one-dimensionally. And Clemson, in terms of their running game, I mean, they did that. They basically said, okay, well, we know what you're doing. Thanks. We'll beat you one-dimensionally. No problem. And that basically is, if you look at what they did schematically, it was stuff where, like I said, they're playing some cover 7. They did some rip Liz on some longer yardage, and basically trying to handle the stuff in the box so that they wouldn't give up the running game. I will say, in power running situations, so 3rd and short, that sort of thing, Clemson was okay in the running game. They did okay. They were 3 out of 4 there. So, it's not like they got stuffed in the running game a bunch. They were stuffed on 24% of their runs. They stuffed on 5 runs. So, I mean, that's not too bad.
Keep in mind, Jason, running backs or anybody for Clemson, they only had 21 carries.
Yeah. Yeah. They didn't.
7 of those were Klubnik.
Yeah. They didn't really try to
scrambles. Run. So you're really looking at 14 carries. They had legitimate handoffs or less to the running backs.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you had Will Shipley 7 carries.
Yeah.
Maffa 2 carries. Pace 3 carries. That's their 4th string running back. Got the second most carries out of their backs. So, I mean, yeah, they didn't try to run it because they came in knowing that Carolina was going to do what they did there. And they knew that basically you can do what you want against Carolina secondary at this point. So actually, I thought a couple of the young guys looked promising. I mean, I thought Marcus Allen played well. He took one gamble that cost him, and that up to the yards after catch by about 40 yards. But, he was pretty close on that one, actually. I mean,
yeah,
it was one where, if he's just a beat earlier, that's a pick 6, but it's a good throw by the quarterback and all that. And he's learning the speed. But all in all, the big issue that got exposed here and to me, and let's think about this from a couple different ways. I can guarantee you that what we're going to hear is that North Carolina just needs to get better players, that they need to continue to recruit to get to the level of Clemson. That's what we're going to hear. That's going to be the offseason. That's going to be the continued mantra around the North Carolina program. What my eyes saw was a North Carolina team that was pretty close to as talented as Clemson. In fact, on the offensive side, North Carolina is more talented than Clemson this year. What we saw was a development and a culture problem emerging yet again against a program that has developed players and has had a strong culture, even though there have been some fractures in that a little bit this year, some culture things that are different. That Clemson team knows how to win because they know how to practice. That's what that program has done. They know how to practice. They practice hard. I've been at their practices. They practice hard. They practice situationally. And they make sure that defense is taken care of on the offensive side and that the offense is served on the defensive side. And they work to establish a physical culture where guys play hard, where the defense tackles to the ground. I mean, this is the thing. Look at not just Clemson's yards after catch, but North Carolina's. North Carolina had 119 yards after catch on how many
27
on 27 catches.
So there's your 4 or less.
Yeah. So I mean, the thing is, Clemson tackled over and over again, and you could see Carolina's skill guys getting a little frustrated at times. I mean, Josh Downs on multiple opportunities was just in the grass, just about ready to break out, and then goes down. And you could see him slapping the ground a few times, like, dang it, I had it. Just that close. Antoine Green running away from a defensive back and getting ready to make a 3rd and long conversion and gets just tackled from behind 1 yard short. And then there's a false start, and now all of a sudden you have to punt. That's the difference, is when it came time for what's the PG version of this? For crunch time. when it came to crunch time for a guy to have to make a play, to stop a drive, to make sure that a guy got on the ground and didn't make a big play out of something, to get a little bit of extra effort to get to the quarterback, Clemson consistently does those things. And they do those things with good technique. With North Carolina, I see a lot of highly recruited guys that look good in pads, that have been trained well in the weight room. They're strong. They move really well, who do not do those things on a consistent basis, or a consistent enough basis. And this is what I've been saying all year. This is what some of us, I mean, Taylor's been saying this all year too. This is not new. This is not new criticism based on losing. I mean, this is stuff that we were saying when North Carolina was winning early in the year. And you remember some folks who were listening to this were not real happy with some of us for calling some of this stuff out then, saying, look, we're winning. And my mantra was, look, eventually process is going to out. Eventually the way you do things and the way you won, eventually when you step up to play against better teams that have as good of players as you, then that stuff's going to start to matter. And North Carolina has now recruited to the level where they can win on the basis of talent up to a point. But at a certain point, you have to develop that talent so that when you play against teams that have comparable talent, you actually look decent. And that's not where they are right now. They're good enough that they can win, say, 9 out of 10 games against outmatched opponents in terms of talent. But there are always going to be those 2 or 3 games every season where you're going to play against a team that has comparable talent to you. and they're not going to win those games right now. And frankly, without Drake May, they're not competitive in those games. Even in this one with Drake May, the competitiveness only lasted a while. But without Drake May this season, even with that talent advantage, what do we think they are? Are they 6-6?
Well, you consider the fact that they had 6 or 7 one-score games.
Yeah. They had 8 one-score games and won 6 of them.
Yeah.
Without Drake May, do they win half of those?
Best case, I say.
Yeah, say best case. So you're looking at 6-6.
Yeah.
So the problem that I see is you can't recruit your way out of a development problem. You can't recruit your way out of a culture problem in terms of talent. At some point, you've got to actually have things set up so that your program is built around toughness and fundamentals with the talent that you bring in. And there are places on this team where you can see the fundamentals getting better. The offensive line got a lot better on fundamentals this year. They did. And you can see the results. And they ran the football okay yesterday. I mean, it was basically even with how Clemson ran it. So, I mean, not the best, but, the 3.1 yards per carry from Elijah Green. I mean, that's not great, but it's, in a big game against that front, that's not bad. So, offensive line got better on fundamentals. There's some positions that do fine that are getting their fundamentals, but as a whole, this program has to take a serious look in the mirror of how it practices on both sides of the ball. This is not just a defensive problem. This is not just a defensive position coach problem, even though I've stated my piece on some of that stuff as well. This is top down. How do you practice? This is DNA of the program stuff.
Yep. 100%. We say all the time, you get what you allow, and it always comes up that way. I'll tell you something that was interesting to me, and I said the same thing, I think, in the bowl game against South Carolina when pretty much the same type outcome was coming. The fourth quarter video, I know this might be petty fan stuff, but the fourth quarter video for South Carolina had them boys working, busting their tail, practice video, just going at it. But did you see Clemson's fourth quarter video last night?
No, I wasn't paying attention.
It was, Carolina's got their usual, you don't want none. Clemson's balls to the wall practice, hitting in practice, doing all this, sweating and all that. I just think it's a whole different cultural mindset. It's like one's going to have our highlights from years past. The others are going to have our team working to get better and all. And it was impressive. I was like, this makes me want to go run out there and concuss myself trying to hit somebody.
Championship teams embrace the grind. They embrace the practice. They embrace the day-to-day, and they just happen to win games along the way. That's what championship teams do. They embrace that part of it, and they stake their identity on that part of it. And North Carolina hasn't done that. You can see it.
Yeah, and it's and it's not a knock on players. Got to step up and do some things sometimes, but it's not a knock on the players at all. I mean, they've got plenty of talent, a lot more talent. Of course, we'll hear they won 9 games this year, and yeah, they did. But how many games did they win where nobody thought they had a chance, or there was an equal talent like you talked about, Jason? And none of those did they win. Clemson 39-10. Let's talk about Johnny T-shirt. We're going to come back and talk some specifics. There's a lot of questions in the chat. I'm not going to be on here all day. I got to get a nap. I can't lie to you. But Johnny T-shirt and JohnnyT-shirt.com, somebody in the tailgate said they could recite my read verbatim from listening to these podcasts all the time. The problem is I don't even know what I'm going to say half the time. So if they can help me out and write me one, that'd be wonderful. But Johnny T-shirt takes care of Inside Carolina Premium subscribers, takes care of everybody that's a Carolina fan across the sports. You got a women's soccer team playing for a national championship, I believe, Monday night. Johnny T-shirt can hook you up there. Johnny T-shirt can get you all the winter wear that you need. Great T-shirts, NIL stuff. NIL stuff is relevant. It will be relevant starting tomorrow heavily. But support Johnny T-shirt. Get your 10% off your premium subscription, or get your 10% off your order with your premium Inside Carolina subscription. Props to the 227 plus that are in here. We'll be right back. National guys, pay the bills. It's the day after. All right, Buck. You recited some stats. This is the day after Inside Carolina's premier game day, post-game day podcast. North Carolina in red zone. Again, same issues. I believe in a column that's about to drop, you call it a dead zone. What in the world has happened to this team in the last 3 weeks where they cannot stop stepping on themselves in the red zone? And last night was absolutely brutal to watch.
Yeah, and I crunched the numbers a little bit from the last 3 games. And in the last 3 games, basically they scored on 50% of their red zone trips, which is atrocious. That's your scoring percentage. Then they scored a touchdown on essentially a third of their trips into the red zone. Think about that. They've got to the inside the 20 17 times and scored 6 touchdowns in the last 3 games. And everybody here knows, and everybody probably listening to this or seeing this knows that I'm a pretty big fan of Phil Longo, but he's got to own some of that. Some of that is play calling. It can't all be execution. At this stage of the year, they should know how to execute whatever plays that Phil dials up. If they fail to do that, and against better defenses, that's going to happen occasionally. But over a 3-game stretch, you're only getting into scoring a touchdown after getting into red zone on a third of your red zone attempts. That is abysmal red zone production. And I know that Mac Brown is going to have a lot to say about that, and he's going to be talking about that a lot, because one thing he's not shy about is criticizing Phil Longo and the offense. But some of that, maybe almost all of it, is justified. What they've been doing the last 3 weeks, how that's changed, or whether defenses have defensive coordinators has figured out, hey, this is what you do in the red zone, so we're going to stop you from doing that. Then, something's got to change there. And Phil Longo in his first several seasons here did have some red zone issues. We all knew that. But this year, through 10 games, we thought he had that solved. He was just tearing it up in the red zone. Last 3 games, it's like they've dropped anchor every time they've crossed the 20-yard line. How to explain that, I don't know. I'm not privileged to that kind of inside knowledge, but it's definitely a huge problem.
Jason, we've talked about once it gets down there, it's physicality and all that, but you got to figure out a way to do something. I mean, it is fascinating to me that it is like the offense just literally hit a brick wall whenever that happened.
Well, I mean,
sometime during the week between Wake and Georgia Tech.
Well, you do wonder whether or not that maybe something happened with Drake against Wake Forest. I mean, he did get lit up at one point a little bit. And, you saw, I don't know if you saw it because you were at the game, but when he was warming up at halftime, he threw a ball and then grimaced real good and then started holding his elbow. I do wonder how healthy Drake May was the last 3 weeks. I have some questions about that, just in terms of how he threw it in a few cases. He missed some throws that you expect him to make, but I mean he missed some throws early in the year too. That he made so many great throws that some of the misses you just kind of overlooked. But we talked about some of them here. But I do wonder a little bit about that. I don't think that's the answer, though. I mean, even if he's not completely healthy, that's not the reason that there have been some struggles. And again, it comes back to a lot of it comes back to me to DNA of the program, where even when Carolina was scoring a bunch in the red zone, they were not doing it by pounding teams. They were not doing it by lining up and finding ways to get the ball into the end zone, in more traditional fashion. They did it because Drake May was Drake May for the most part. And, they won with, throwing the football into the end zone on a lot of that. What it appeared to me happened over the last 3 weeks is Georgia Tech showed a template that was followed by NC State and Clemson with better personnel. And that template was, and I need to find the numbers here, but that template was, do not allow North Carolina to score from outside the red zone.
Mm-hmm.
So basically take away all of those big plays, all of the over the top stuff, all the stuff down the field, and try to contain Drake May's legs with, some mush rush stuff. Don't try to get too upfield with your rushers. Make sure that he's penned in a little bit so you can minimize his play with his legs and minimize the down the field stuff. Force North Carolina to be patient, throwing it underneath, running the football, and then play red zone roulette. That's what they did. And in the red zone, they were able to win out with, better physicality and bracketing Josh Downs.
Mm-hmm.
So teams basically figured out, I mean, how many times in the first 8 games, maybe 9 games, how many times down in the red zone did we see Josh Downs just win a one-on-one?
Over and over and over again.
How many times did we see Josh Downs in a one-on-one the last 3 weeks?
I can't remember too many.
I can think
once.
of 2 or 3, but they were handed off. So to me, what happened there was more of an emphasis on don't give up plays over the top, bracket Josh Downs, and then force anybody else other than Drake May's legs or Josh Downs to beat you in the red zone. And ultimately, that Carolina didn't have a whole lot of other answers there.
Yeah, I mean, somebody in the chat, and this is what we talked about pregame. We thought Nesbitt would be big time. Nesbitt had 2 targets. Morales looked good. He got dinged on one of those plays early. But yeah, I mean, Buck, that's what we've heard about forever: is make a team beat you left-handed, or your team is not your bread and butter is not going to do it. Somebody's going to have to come up with some plain toast to beat us, and teams did it the last 3 weeks, and there was no other answer. That's the thing that should be disconcerting, is that there was nothing changed. Georgia Tech, State, Clemson, there was no adjustment to this is what they're doing. We're not going to let this happen. Do something different, and it didn't happen. Somebody said bend, don't break, and all that. That is the teams were the definition of bend, don't break against North Carolina in the last 3 weeks. Give them all you want between the 20s, lock them up inside the 20s. Buck,
I'm gonna go one more thing here, because I just noticed one other thing in the numbers.
All right.
And it goes with what my eyes have seen as well. And that is Caleb Hood got hurt against Pittsburgh. Through the Pittsburgh game, the only game that Carolina did not have success in the red zone was Miami. Now, Miami was the only team other than Notre Dame that they played in the early part of the season that had, dudes on the defensive line. But that notwithstanding, they scored 5 touchdowns in 6 opportunities against Pitt, 5 touchdowns in 6 opportunities against Duke. And then Virginia, well, it's Virginia, but they're actually pretty decent up front. 3 touchdowns on 5 opportunities in the red zone against Virginia. And then all of a sudden, the touchdown rate fell off. Wake Forest, Georgia Tech. Wake Forest is 5 of 8. Georgia Tech, it was 1 of 5. NC State, 3 of 7. And then Clemson, 1 of 5. I do wonder also, again, the impact of losing Caleb Hood, who had some success in that middle section. That didn't help. Having not being able to run the football between the tackles with the success that they'd hoped for on this was a factor. Anyway.
Yeah, I mean, injuries happen, right? They always speak next man up. But let's sort of wrap this one and try to get out of here. Look, there's going to be a lot of discussion this week, and just so our listeners and watchers, and there's a ton of y'all in here, and I appreciate it, and appreciate all the ones that were out tailgating with us last night in Charlotte. A great time.
It was a fun time, guys. That was a fun time.
It was a blast. If we could get the Bowls lot like every week, like that was last night, there would be no issues. You know, you got to play Tetris to get your car in the parking lot. Shout out to Mike Tester for making all that happen at that place last night. But what a great atmosphere. But just in general, we've been watching this a long time. It just feels like North Carolina had a grand opportunity, and unfortunately it was the same old, same old. And that, for me, is probably the thing that's the thing that causes me the most issues watching this team is like, we're on this rail. It's going where it's going to go. We're not going to do anything to change the slide. Where are you after an ACC championship game, after 3 straight losses on a 9-win season?
I think, without question, you can't go into you're going to prepare for the bowl game. Obviously, that's got to happen. And how they go about that will be interesting to watch. But what's going to be more interesting is what they do starting in January. What's going to happen then? Because there's a lot of introspection that needs to happen after this game by the players and the staff. Hang on one second. You got me choked up, Tommy.
Yeah, I know. Get it together, Buck.
Yeah, you got me choked up thinking about this. So what they can't do is go into next season saying it's business as usual. We're just going to keep doing what we've been doing and hope for a better result. Because we all know that's the definition of insanity. They got to change some stuff. One point I wanted to make before we checked out of here is early in the year, through the first 5 or 6 games, every week we talked about how blessed North Carolina was in the tight end room. Tight ends were killing it through the first third half of the season. Bryson Nesbitt has not had a touchdown reception since the 5th game of the year. The entire second half of the season, he's been MIA as far as touchdown receptions. Morales the same way. He hasn't had a touchdown reception in the last 6 games. I don't know what happened to the tight ends in the red zone, because that was their bread and butter in the early part of the season. Those guys were catching passes early on. I think Nesbitt had 3 and Morales had 3. And I think Morales finished with 4 and Nesbitt finished with 3. Somehow or another, they went away from throwing the ball to the tight end. I don't know why. I don't know how that happened. But that's, sort of a small anomaly compared to the overall big picture stuff with North Carolina's football program. They need a change somewhere that's going to bring about the kinds of changes Jason's talked about as far as practice. somehow or another, North Carolina's got to find a way to practice better, practice harder, build some physicality, build some toughness, because in games where that's been required, they've come up short. So
we talking
that's
about
where
practice, man.
yeah,
practice.
we're talking about practice.
We're talking about
about a lot there. But that's where I'm at with this. If what you're doing in practice is not building physicality and toughness, what are you doing it for? Basically. So
Yeah,
aside from getting choked up about it, that's my comments.
Hey, you care. You fought through it, the adversity of that cough drop, and it saved you. And you came up with the point, Jason. This program's DNA. You've harped on it a lot. We're going to talk about it a lot over the next weeks. It's going to be. I don't even know what to say about this week in college football in general, in North Carolina specifically, with what's coming down the line. But how does one change program DNA, at least in one off season? It's not possible totally. But how does one do it? I'm teeing it up.
Well, there are a few different ways. One is to fully clean house in terms of your coaching staff. That's a way. It's not necessarily the way that you ought to do it in this kind of case, but it's a way. Bottom line is, it comes from, and this is a word we've used a lot on this show over the last few years. It's accountability. It starts by building accountability, and you do a lot of this in the off season in terms of your strength and conditioning program and all of that. And yeah, the S&C head is a big part of that, as is the rest of the S&C staff. But how that's going to be done and exactly what's required there is handed down from the head coach and handed down from the position coaches in terms of, this is what we expect, here's what we want to be done, and so on, to some degree. And then there's autonomy within those constraints for the S&C staff. And I think Carolina's S&C staff is pretty good, actually. But then it basically boils down to, in the spring is where you build the physicality and the fundamentals of your program. You've got to have a very physical spring. You've got to have guys tackling to the ground. You've got to have emphasis on inside run over and over and over again. Those of you who are around for the Butch days will remember that. So, that's a part of it. And then the other thing, and this is the part that I think gets more difficult, is you have to have everybody in alignment in terms of vision for what you're going to be as a program, as a complete team on both sides of the ball. And what that means is, the offense can't just be about the offense, and the defense can't just be about the defense. You have to have the two coordinators coordinated by the head coach to say, yeah. I know offensively, I know you don't run any too tight stuff. I know you don't put a tight end on the line of scrimmage. I know it's all H-back stuff. But you know what? We're going to install some of that stuff, and we're going to run the heck out of it in practice right now, just because I want my offensive line and my defensive line and my linebackers and all of these guys to learn how to play in the box and to play physical. And we're going to run those things so much per day, even if ultimately that means we score, 4 or 5 points fewer a game. That's fine. What matters is, when we play against a team that's going to line up and be more physical with us, we got to be able to be ready. You got to do that stuff. So, I mean, this is the thing. I mean, and there's, so I'm going to open up a little can of worms here for the off season.
Ruh-roh.
So one thing that Mac Brown said when he took over is that after doing all his commentating stuff and all of that, he wanted to bring in an offense that he wanted to bring in as close to Lincoln Riley's offensive approach as he could, right? We all remember that. Let me ask you a question. How many good defenses has have been on teams with Lincoln Riley as a head or as an offensive coordinator? How many times has there been a good defense opposite Lincoln Riley?
Very few, if any.
And keep in mind, Lincoln Riley was a really good offensive coordinator under Bob Stoops at Oklahoma, where when he went out there, they were known for what?
Defense.
Now, he got out there, and within 3 or 4 years, they were scoring 50 a game, but they couldn't stop anybody.
Right.
And then what did we just see in the Pac-12 title game? What happened in the Pac-12 title game? For those, I mean, I'm sure you guys watched it, or at least part of it. What happened?
Got whipped physically.
They got manhandled in terms of the physical part of the football game. Now, look, some of that's first year out at USC. And I do think Lincoln Riley's going to get some things figured out there. They're going to recruit insane talent. They're going to put up numbers. They're going to be a playoff team, before too long. So this is not a criticism of Lincoln Riley overall as a coach, but I'm just look at that result. When push came to shove in championship weekend, Utah went out there and ran over those boys.
I'm just check in for a second. That probably the average age of a Utah lineman is like 28.
It's a factor. Yeah, it's a factor. But keep in mind, Utah got physically stalemated, at least stalemated by Florida in their game 1 loss against Florida. When it came time to win the line of scrimmage, Florida handled that Utah team. But Florida, a little bit different brand of football from Dan Mullen and Napier. They're gonna play physical football. That's what Florida's done the last few years. They've got their own problems down there, but they handled Utah in that physicality there. Now, and of course, USC, lost to Utah, 43-42 earlier in the year. So, I mean, that it doesn't always go that way. But again, what you're not seeing is Southern Cal stopping Utah. Right? So Ryan Day takes over at Ohio State, right? And he runs a similar offense to what they're running. Lincoln Riley, Phil Longo, some similarities there too. What's happened with Ohio State's defense since Ryan Day took over?
It hasn't gone downhill quite as precipitously as, say, USC.
No,
but it's showing signs of wear at this point.
They're not a top 5 defense. I mean,
no.
and they
were at one time.
Yeah, that Ohio State defense, that Ohio State team. I think that Ohio State team is the most talented team in the country. I think they're more talented than Georgia. But Georgia, in terms of their defensive culture, is totally different. So the reason I say this is opening up a little bit of a can of, for off-season discussion, a can of worms, is a lot of these things are going to get blamed on the defense and on the defensive staff. This is the second coordinator with different coaches. Now you got 3 of the same position coaches, and we can have some off-season conversations about whether or not those 3 coaches that were retained are, have managed their positions perfectly. But I just wonder, if you're talking about building your program DNA and you're talking about changing the way you do things and all of that, how much of that boils down to what systems you decide to run and how that builds how that naturally builds the physicality or the kind of nature of your program. And, the same thing could be said about Larry Fedora. Do you think North Carolina was ever going to field a, say, top 20, top 15 defense under Larry Fedora?
Yeah, that wasn't going to happen.
It wasn't, because Larry wasn't interested in it. His focus was, we're going to outscore teams.
The difference, though, Jason, is that North Carolina has recruited so well on that side of the ball.
Yep.
I was in a position where I could see the team very well on the sideline last night, and you got KBJ standing over there, Keyshawn Silver, Travis Shaw,
Ritzy,
Jacoby Colden, Ritzy, Murphy, on and on and on. And those are some, and they look good too. I mean, KBJ looks good. You know, he's not nearly as. At one point, we could have called him really out of shape and so on and so forth. And
not
he still
anymore.
has
He looked good. He looked good out there last night.
There's a lot of so much talent on that defense. Where is it gone? You know, how are we not blending that talent together to put a solid defensive product on the field?
Well, again, this gets back to the DNA thing, and to me, so with Larry, you didn't even have those players on campus.
You didn't have those players. That's the difference I was pointing out.
Yeah. And now but you got similar results. I mean, that this year's defense was not a whole lot better than some of the bad defenses in Fedora's era.
Yeah, almost 2014 bad.
Yeah, I mean, it was in the same breath, and so my take on this has been that, as far as I can tell, and there may be some folks really mad at me in the Carolina football facility for saying this, but at the end of the day, I got to call it like I see it. And my impression has been that Mac Brown came in and essentially made the decision, we're going to recruit top level talent on defense, and then we're going to have a prolific offensive system, and you combine that and the talent will take care of things on defense, and we're going to score points, and there's your championship formula. So essentially the idea has been, if you just get those dudes out there on the field and you turn them loose, that's going to take care of everything. If you get enough Ritzy, Silvers, Shaw, you get Ritzy, Silver, Shaw, Bingley Jones, Murphy.
Cohen is as big as any of them.
Yeah.
He's as big as any of them.
Yeah. You get all of those guys out there and you just turn them loose, and they're going to, that's going to be enough. That it's just about having the players on defense. And then offensively, you've got to have, your quarterback and then a good system, and you're good to go. But we've talked in the past about one of the benefits that I've had of covering multiple teams. I've seen teams with top 5 talent just completely crap the bed over and over and over again, and have bad team culture, and have defenses that top 5, 6 talent in terms of what you brought on campus recruiting wise, but can't field a top 40 defense. Why? Well, look at the systems in place. Having talent having that kind of talent, having the kind of talent you're pointing to, Buck, is a sine qua non. It's a threshold thing. You have to have it. You're not going to win at a championship level without it. But it's a necessary but not a sufficient cause. You have to have it, but without the other pieces in place, in terms of the structure of how you practice and what you're doing to make sure that those guys are prepared and developed. And that comes from, I think, having a little bit more balance in terms of what you're doing offensively in practice as well, to give those guys a look and to make those guys develop in certain ways. It's not going to be enough. And that's where Carolina is right now. So I just opened a big can of worms for the offseason, but that's my impression, is that they've basically taken the approach of, let's get these guys on campus. Let's make sure that we don't chase them off once they're here. And once you have the all bus team getting off that bus, they'll take care of business once we turn them loose on the field. And the fact is, it doesn't work that way. You have to have it. Necessary, but it's not sufficient. They've got to figure out that other part now.
If it was just a talent thing, Miami would win multiple national championships.
Look at Texas A&M this year.
And yeah, absolutely.
Look at Florida State during Taggart. My goodness.
I mean, and that's, to your point, that's the thing. It's just like, got to recruit better. We got to recruit better. Yeah, it doesn't work. If the most talented person won all the time, it just doesn't happen. Buck, last words. I'm ready to get out of here. Jacoby Criswell announced he is transferring via Twitter. I shared the link. Folks are seeing it on the message boards as well. First shoe to drop. Not unsurprising, though.
That guy's been so classy all year.
I know.
I wish him the best going forward.
I do too. Tommy, how about this?
He hasn't said one negative thing about anything at his time at Carolina. Just a great teammate there. Go ahead, Buck.
For a change, why don't you take us out of here? How about that?
Man.
Go ahead. Wrap it up. Give us some of your final thought.
No, I just think.
Take us out of here.
Here's my thing. We've heard all along that it's a talent issue. Jason just nailed why it's not a talent issue. We've heard all along that the fan base needs to step up. We've heard all along that if we just do this, if this happens, if we do that, everything's going to be all right. And then for the last 3 weeks, we've heard this team has won 9 games and they're playing in the ACC Championship. You guys ought to like that. That's everybody. That's what everybody says. That ought to be enough. And quite frankly, they're an 8-win team. But here's what's disappointing. It's time for the people. It's time for the people that have control of all these things that you and Jason have talked about to do something about it instead of being satisfied with being just good enough. That's the thing. Clemson came out there and nothing to play for in their thing and whipped Carolina. And they did it doing what they've done all year. The trenches are brutal. The physicality is brutal. All the things that define football for North Carolina have been brutal lately, and all the flashes have been there. But you and I have followed it a long time. I've seen that game that we saw last night over and over and over again. And if you want people to continue to support it and support this NIL stuff and all, then you, the adults in the room, have to step up and do it because it's not on the kids, I don't think. I mean, I may be wrong, but there's a good chance that 20 or 25 or whatever 4 stars weren't all misevaluated.
You don't have 5-6 guys that are blue chip defensive linemen all underperforming and then blame those guys. Yeah. You just don't.
It's not talent. It'd be interesting. The next few weeks for North Carolina football are going to be interesting. I hope for the players' sake they don't go to the Holiday Bowl, because if they go to the Holiday Bowl, they're going to play in front of crickets and tumbleweeds out there because the fan base is worn out from seeing the same thing over and over again for this North Carolina team. They go to the Gator Bowl. Some people can drive down there. Either way, it's another opportunity to play. Buck, I guess we got one more day after podcast at some point later in December or in January, whenever those 2 bowls are. Jason, it's always a pleasure. We got a ton more to talk about, but we're getting out of here now. It's 9:05 Sunday morning. Shout out to the 300-plus folks that have come to join us. It's been the day after Carolina roughed up and run out by the Tigers. But, Jason, I appreciate it.
Thanks, Tommy.
Thanks, Tommy.
Thanks, Jason.